Hi, welcome back to my channel, Living Solo, Living Well, and I'm Kat. And I wanted to just tell some funny or interesting, they're not all funny, but they're interesting, patient stories from when I worked at different places, different facilities. And I'm a registered nurse, and so I have a lot of stories to tell. Anyway, I wanted to start off by just, I'm not going to mention any names. If I happen to mention any names, they are made up names. So there's no HIPAA violation, nothing where anybody can identify any patients by the stories that I tell. So anyway, I just thought it'd be kind of a fun thing to do because as a nurse or anyone working in the medical field or nursing field, you see all kinds of humorous, funny, weird, just crazy stories. And so I jotted a bunch down on my tablet, and I'm going to use my tablet as a reference of bullet points. So the first one I want to talk about, this was a lady, an elderly woman that I knew from many, many, many years ago. And they had a business that I had frequented. And so I knew her, I knew of her, I knew her, I went to church with her. And so I had her and her husband as patients at a facility, and he had passed away well before her. Then she declined with dementia. And so one day she had come out into the hall where I had my med cart, and I was passing morning meds. And we had a CNA that was a travel CNA from another, I think it was another state. I think it was Alabama, maybe. So this CNA was standing next to me, and the patient shuffled her way out of her bedroom or her facility room where she lived. And she was standing there. She didn't really carry on communication because she was pleasant, but she was confused and just didn't carry on conversations. And so she was standing there, and we noticed something sticking out of the bottom of her pants leg. And so the CNA reached down to pull it out, and this patient would have a habit of standing at her closet door just trying on different clothes for some reason. So there would be piles of clothes, and she'd have on just weird outfits, but she was a sweetheart. But this particular morning, the CNA reached down to pull something that was under the bottom of the pants leg. And she starts pulling it out, and it was another pair of pants. So she pulls it out, and it just kept coming. And it reminded me of, when the clowns are all crammed into a little Volkswagen, and then one comes out, and there's 100 of them that come out. And you're like, how did all that fit in there? How did all those clowns fit in there? So as the CNA pulled that other pair of pants out, another item of clothing appeared down there below the pants leg. So the CNA just kept pulling and pulling, and she must have had 3 or 4 different clothing items stuffed in her pants, and they slid down her leg under the pants to where we could see them sticking out from below the pants leg. So we got a good kick out of that, and the patient had no idea how funny that was. She grinned, but she didn't know what was going on. Her little innocent mind, we were laughing, so she laughed. But that's probably one of the funniest things that I've seen. And then there was another time that I was on a particular unit working at a facility, and a patient, an elderly woman with a walker, came walking onto our unit, and she was not one of our patients. So she was on the wrong unit. So I had gone over there. It was one evening before shift change, and I had gone to meet her to kind of help her turn around and guide her back to her unit. And she wasn't having any part of that. So when I decided I'd just walk with her, and I'm trying to tell her, we need to turn this way. This is where you live, over here. And all of a sudden she took her walker and she started beating me with her walker. So I moved away, but it was funny. It's just like, it was so funny. And I don't think I ended up with any bruises or anything, but it was just a typical story about an elderly woman and she's whacking you with her walker. So there was another patient that we had who she had had a stroke. So she was, it affected her that in a way that made her just feel carefree. She didn't have a care in the world. She didn't have any modesty. She didn't care. And so she had a colostomy bag, and she'd come out of her room with her gown on, open in the front, not tied. And we'd have to catch her, we'd have to say, they don't want to look at your ostomy bag, but she also was not clothed underneath her gown. And she had no idea. I mean, she didn't care, did not faze her one bit. And she had a couple of sisters, and they also had said, she's not modest at all. I mean, the stroke had caused her to not have a care in the world. And so that was always funny. We always had to kind of stay on guard because she'd come out like in she was elderly, but she'd have a crop t-shirt on and she'd have a pair of skanky shorts, and didn't even seem like that's the kind of stuff that she normally would wear. But there was her ostomy bag, just right there in plain view, and she didn't care. So we always had to kind of keep her on her toes, or she kept us on our toes, and we had to make sure she was decent whenever she would come out, because you never knew what she was going to do. So there was another time, and this isn't a funny story, but it's a scary story, but it's the reality of working home health where you're going into people's homes. So I had a patient, this has been years ago. I had trained with another nurse at this home health agency, and this was actually her patient, but I had trained with her with that patient several times. And so one day he was on my schedule, and the other nurse was not there that day. So I remember thinking, I'll have to show up unannounced because the other nurse was sick or off. So I called the patient, and he lived with his mother. He was paralyzed from the waist down. So he lived with his mother, and they lived in just an old farmhouse somewhere, 10 minutes away. And I remember there were some issues with that family. I think this patient became paralyzed due to some illegal drug activity and driving and what have you. But so we all knew he was involved in dealing drugs. So I was always a little, skeptical to go out there, especially by myself, because you just didn't know. And it was out in a rural area at a farmhouse, just way out in the country. There's nobody nearby. So if anything happened, you're SOL. So this one day when I went out with his actual nurse, and we did wound care. He had a wound. So we had to call the ambulance to transport him because his wound was infected. And as I was checking his legs, I raised up the sheet, and he had all of his guns and ammo between his legs. And so I told him, I said, now when the ambulance gets here, you're going to have to take those out and put them somewhere because they're not going to let you take them. So I just pretend like it was a normal thing to see all your guns in your bed and under the covers. And so I knew he had the guns. So this day he was on my schedule, and I had to call the number to let them know I'm coming out. His mom answered his phone. She answered his phone. And I said, hey, this is Kat. I'll be coming out. They have him on my schedule today. And she said, well, go on out. I'm at the mall and I've got his phone, but go on out. It'll be fine. And I thought, oh, you don't just show up unannounced to a drug dealer's house. So she said, just make sure you stomp on the porch and he'll hear you, and just tell him who you are. And he knew who I was. So you just have to kind of announce yourself so that, you're okay. So I go out there, and it's way out, secluded. So I go up to the porch, and I'm still a little kind of iffy. And I stomp my way on the porch so he'll hear something, because he was in a bed. He was handicapped. he was in a bed in the living room in the corner. So he could see out the window, see out, as you came in the door, but he could not get up and walk. So I go up, stomp on the steps, knock on the door, and I cracked the door and I said his name. Hey, it's Kat. You're on my schedule. Your mom said, come on out. She's at the mall. And as I opened the door, he was to my left. His bed was in the corner and there's a gun aimed right at me. And I was scared to death. And I said, oh, hey, I said, they put you on my schedule and I tried to call you and your mom answered. She has your phone. And so he put the gun down. So my job was to change his dressing on his wound. And when I changed the dressing, normally on other visits when I was there with the other nurse, we would go into the kitchen and get a trash bag, a little paper sack or something to put the, dressing, saturated dressing in. And so I started to do that, and I had this gut feeling that somebody was in the kitchen on the other side of the wall that you couldn't see. And so when I asked him, hey, what do you want me to do with this old dressing? And he said, oh, just toss it on the floor. My mom will get it when she gets home. And I said, I don't want to dirty her floor. This is before I had that feeling. And he said, oh, you just put it on the floor. I said, oh, I'll just go get a trash bag. And so as I went towards the kitchen, all of a sudden I had that feeling and I turned around. I said, you know what? I don't want to go digging through her kitchen. Are you sure she's okay if I just toss this on the floor? He said, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And I could not get out of there fast enough. I just felt like there was somebody in the house, in the kitchen on the other side of that wall, which is why he would have been saying, just toss it on the floor so I don't have to go in there. And the other thing that made me think somebody was in there is normally when you go over, they had dogs and the dogs they'd have to put them up and they'd be barking. Even in another room, they'd be barking. There was no sound whatsoever. So something was weird. And the fact that he said, oh, just toss it on the floor. And the fact that I had that, bolus of epinephrine shoot through my body like something was wrong and I had to turn around and not complete that task. So that was scary. And when I got back to the home health office, I promptly informed my director, I will never go out to that house again. I had a gun pulled on me and I'm not going to do that again. And she said, oh, he's fine. And I said, no, not going to happen again. So that was my scariest, I would say that's probably the scariest episode I had. There was another one where I was working with a hospice company, and this was a call for a death in the middle of the night. I think it was like 2 a.m., 2 something a.m., and the house is about 5 minutes from my house or less, just a couple minutes really. And so I had only met them, the husband and the wife. She was the one with cancer and ultimately ended up passing away. But I'd only met them one other time with another nurse during the daytime. So here it is, 2 a.m., 2-ish a.m., and I had to go pronounce, and then I had to call the funeral home, and I had to wait for them to come. So while I was on the phone with him when he first called to say that she'd passed away, he actually said, well, what do I do? Do I cover her up? What do I do? And I said, you can throw a blanket over her. That's fine. Pull the sheet up or, if you want to. So when I got there, the funeral home was not there yet. So I'm at a strange person's house in the middle of the night it was in the projects locally where, the public housing is. And so, but it was middle of the night dark and it was scary. It wasn't as scary as having a gun aimed at me when I walk in a house, but it was still kind of scary. So I called the funeral home once I pronounced, and then they were on their way out, and I was trying my hardest to get my charting done to where I could leave with them and not be there by myself, but I didn't make it. I ended up having to stay for a little bit longer after they left, and it just made me so nervous because here was a man in a house I didn't know in the dark in the middle of the night. Nobody knew I was there. I think the business, the company I worked for, would have ultimately known because the call came in to them and it routed to my number. So because I was on call that evening or that night. So that was that was one of the scary times too, but it wasn't as bad as the gun situation. So then there was another time, and where I had to go pronounce a death. I was working for a different hospice company, and this was also 5 minutes away. Now, I was not on call. I never did on call because I had the injuries with my vision and other things. So it was hard for me to see at night at that point. But this was 5 minutes away. It was less than a mile from my house, and they had called me about 8:30 that night. My director did, and said, I know you're not on call, but can you just go pronounce? Because it's going to be a while before another nurse can get out there. And at the time, RNs, I'm an RN, we could pronounce a death. The LPNs could not. So they had to have an RN go out and pronounce, but then we could have an LPN relieve us if we had to. So prior to getting the call from the director, I have taken, ever since the brain injury and no sleep, I have taken Delta 8 gummies at night. My doctors all know it, and that helped me to get the sleep I needed to recover. I needed rest. And so that evening around 8, I think I took a portion of one. And then they called about 8:30 and said, can you just go? It's a mile away. Just go pronounce, and then we can send someone else out to wait for the funeral home. And I said, sure. And when I hung up and was getting ready to go, I could feel the Delta 8 gummy kicking in. And I thought, oh, what have I done? Because, I don't want to be out driving with that. So I thought I'll just be 5 minutes away. So I go out there. It was pitch black in where you parked and had to walk up the back way to their house. It was right in town on a side street, but it was still really dark. I couldn't see where I was going. I had to walk through a bunch of trees and stuff. So I get in there, and when you pronounce, you have to listen to breath sounds, heart sounds, pupillary response, a bunch of different things. And so here I was already worried because I had taken the Delta 8 gummy. And so I started sweating. And I'm leaning down with my stethoscope to listen to this sweet woman, to see if she had any breath sounds or heart sounds. And I'm listening, and it has to be really quiet, and the family's all standing around. They had a ton of family members there, so there are probably 4 or 5 in the room. And as I'm leaning down, I'm dripping sweat on this poor woman. And at one point, I looked up at one of the sons and I said, do you have a towel? So he got a couple of paper towels. So I'm like wiping my sweat because I'm dripping on this deceased woman. And I felt horrible for that. But what was I supposed to do? So I did end up pronouncing her. And I called our director so they could send an LPN out because I was not in any shape to really be there. So I was still sweating like a dog. And for some reason, maybe I was nervous about having taken the Delta 8. I don't know, but it was not pretty. And the LPN finally got there. I kind of gave her a report, already called the funeral home. So she was just waiting there for them. So that was really, really uncomfortable. So let's see. There was, I'm looking to see, okay, there was this other time that we had a patient, an elderly woman on the long-term care side of this nursing home. And you would have patients that would report their blanket was missing, or their quilt was stolen, or their puzzle they put together was stolen. And so we had, there was one of the patients that she was the one doing it. And they would tell us she was in my room, and we would find items in her room that she took from their room. So anyway, she tended to, if you confronted her, she would have a big meltdown in the middle of the unit. Little short woman, but man, she could fire it up. And she would, to distract you, she would go into this like a tirade, where she was just going overboard, pitching a fit, screaming, yelling. And but she ended up, being the one that was taking everything. So that was always, I have a hair in my mouth. That was always exciting because you never knew when she was going to explode or what she was going to do. And then we had this other night when I was on light duty from the fall and the injuries. We had a patient who had, I think she had schizophrenia, and she was elderly. And so I was tasked with helping her eat with a bedside table in the nurse office, this little closet essentially. And so we had her in there, and it was evening time, dinner time. So I was sitting there just kind of monitoring her, making sure she would try to stand up and she'd end up falling. So we had to keep an eye on her. And I was trying to get her to eat, and she would take a bite and she'd spit it in her lap. She'd take another bite, she'd spit it in her lap. And then, we're trying to tell her, you need to chew it up and eat it and swallow. You can't spit it out. So at one point I was sitting there with her, and she was eyeing this chair on the other side of her table. We had the table pushed up, a bedside rolling table pushed up against this heavy chair, so she couldn't go forward. She could just sit there, go backwards in her wheelchair. But so she sees this chair on the other side of her table, and one of the nurses or CNAs had their scrub jacket across that chair. And all of a sudden she was sitting there, and I don't know how my reflexes were this quick, but she decides to all of a sudden stand up, reach over the table, grab that jacket. And as I saw her, like, again, I don't know how my reflexes were so spot on, but as she reached over the table to grab the jacket, I kind of knew what she was going to do. And I intercepted. I reached over her, I grabbed that jacket, and I threw it back. And it was just so funny because, if you knew these patients, they're wonderful patients, but when they got wild, they got wild. And she would go through her spells. So we ended up having to sedate her because it was terrible what all she was trying to do. And so we had to get an order from the provider to sedate her, and kind of gave us a little break, but gave her a break and kept her safe. So that was interesting. And then, let's see, I'm looking on my bullet points here. I worked at a recovery center, and this was a big time place that, if you know of the TV show Dr. Phil, he would recommend, or he would refer patients to that detox facility. They treated eating disorders, alcoholism, drug and addiction, some mental illnesses as well. Like they had a schizophrenia patient in there at one point, but bipolar and all kinds of things that we weren't really trained for. And so this one evening, there was another female nurse and myself. We were the only two nurses there on a Sunday afternoon, and we had no security. And the local police department was probably 20 minutes away, 30 minutes away. And, they just never came when you called them. It was very rural and, just way out in the middle of nowhere. So this one day, this guy came in the night before. I think it might have been a Friday evening. And so we would go to their room and tell them to come up to the nurse's station area so we could do their vital signs. And we didn't cater to them and go to their room to do it. They had to have responsibility and come to us. So they would also come to us for their medications. We didn't take them to their rooms. So they were trying to teach them, how to live a normal life without these addictions and these issues. So this one guy, he was a pro wrestler, and he finally came over. I went in his room twice. He finally came out. So we had a desk with the arm, like a tabletop. It's like a school desk where you can put your arm on here and you can write. So that's the kind of desk they sat at for us to do their blood pressure. And as I was putting the blood pressure cuff on, he just balled up his fists and he slammed them on the table, and I moved my hand just in time. So I just stood there patiently waiting for him to calm down, and then I got his blood pressure. So a couple of days later, that same weekend, so it might have been a Friday night. So on or Friday morning. So on Sunday morning, there was another guy brought in that had been on like a 10-day or 7-day heroin binge. And this guy comes in, and he was a big shot at a facility in a major city nearby, and at the same type of facility. He was like a CEO of a recovery center. So he had been on a 7-day binge. And so he's literally gone, he went psycho. He was yelling, and because he was, he was detoxing, but he was going crazy. So at one point, we had a phone, the corded phone. We didn't have a cordless phone. And so I stretched the cord all the way back into the med room and pushed the door to, and I'm trying to call 911 to get police officers out there to help us. And they never sent them. They never showed up. But while I was tucked away in that closet with that phone cord and the phone, I was literally shaking head to toe. I was so nervous because this guy could jump over the counter and get us, or come in the door to the nurse's station. It wasn't secure until after I quit, and then they secured everything, and you had to have a key card to enter, so nobody could get into the nurse's station at that point. But not while I was there. They were able to. So at one point, when the guy walked away, he went into the dining room, I think. So a little while later, we looked through the dining room window, which was a one-way mirror kind of thing. They couldn't see us, but we could see them. And I heard this commotion. So I thought, oh no, what now? So I looked over, and he and the pro wrestler, the guy that banged his fist down, they were cutting up and having a grand old time. So when the pro wrestler walked out a little while later, he walked past me, and let me back up, because prior to that, where they were carrying on and having a good time, he had walked past me earlier and said, I can take him down just like that. And I said, well, I appreciate that, but just hold off. So he was gonna rescue me and take that guy down, because he was a pro wrestler. He was stout and strong. And so I said, no, just hold on. Let's just wait a little bit. So the next thing I know, they're having a grand old time in the dining room, and everything's all peachy keen, and he diffused the situation. So when he had come out later and walked past me, I gave him a thumbs up. I said, thank you. So that was interesting, like a big turn of events, or like I thought he was someone that we couldn't trust, that we had to be careful with, but he actually took care of the big CEO guy and diffused the situation with him. So that was nice. That was just an unusual situation. And then let me see if I've got any other stories. I think that's pretty much it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed some of these nursing tales. And, in nursing, you never know what you're going to get. You're going to get funny stories. You're going to get sad stories. You're going to get scary stories. So anyway, if you guys are nurses or in the medical field, CNAs, whatever, doctors, drop a comment below and let me know what your funniest or scariest or worst story is or was, and let's just kind of have a discussion and see what compare stories. So you guys take care, and then I will see you on the next video.